Structural racism is a way of describing the ways that ideas about race, and in particular, ideas about white supremacy, shape the structures that are part of our lives. So one way to think about that, and I think the clearest way to think about that, is to think about institutions or institutional racism. So there are lots of institutions that we're a part of all the time: universities, schools, prisons, governments, that are part of our everyday lives, and that might seem on their face like they're just kind of neutral. But when you use the sort of lens of thinking about race and racism, you might see how those institutions produce or recreate or perpetuate or continue practices of race and racism. So in a contemporary moment, we might see institutional or structural racism in, say, an admissions process in a school or a university or a job market, maybe. In our contemporary moment, the kind of hip thing that people like to do is to say, we're being colorblind. We're not going to pay attention to race. So that means if a black candidate and a white candidate both come and they apply for this job or they apply for this position in this school, then we are just going to close our eyes and pretend that we can't see race, and then it will be fair. But because of all of these histories and legacies and memories of race and racism that are really deep inside all of our brains and really deep inside the ways that our institutions are structured, they're all going to see race anyway. The people who are reading the application are going to see race, but also the kind of structures that the applicants have been through their whole lives have shaped them in racialized ways. So maybe someone went to a really good public school and someone went to a not very good public school. Maybe someone had a lot of resources for after-school programs and another person, didn't have those resources. So all of these kinds of structures have shaped their lives in ways that have to do with race before they even get to the admissions process. So then to kind of close our eyes and say, let's pretend race isn't here, actually enacts unfairness and perpetuates the racism. So I would say that's kind of how structural racism works today.
Breakdown Friday, what it is, my people. Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones, and we are here back again. We appreciate all the love and support that we are getting here on the Shows of Giants. All you who are sharing the videos, all the new subscribers, all the current subscribers, all the comments and everything, the sensible comments, the good comments. Some of the comments be left, but love everybody. Thank you for the support. Structural racism. We're here to break down structural racism, going over what it is, how it affects us, and ultimately, from what we've learned about true structural racism, how the system of white supremacy, how it is maintained, and how it refines itself. It's difficult for a lot of people to describe or to prove that racism or structural racism even still exists. So we're going to be breaking these things down and going further into these questions, topics, and things about what structural racism is, how it affects us, and if structural racism even still exists today. So you saw the clip from the young lady giving her definition of what structural racism is. I chose this video because I was listening to what she was saying, and her definition of structural racism seems, to me, it seems like it represents a common definition or a common thought process about what structural racism is. And some of the examples that she was using, because as she started talking about the institutions, the different institutions, the schools and all these things here, my first question was, what did structural racism look like before these modern institutions existed? And did structural racism just begin when these modern institutions were implemented, or did structural racism exist before these modern institutions were implemented? But before we get into these things, let's give our definitions of structural racism from what we've learned. And since he got his blazer on, start with Cool Mo D. Now we start with Professor Carl Tone Jones. What is, and from your all of your studies and things, what is structural racism?
Well, and I took my time to write some things down, because it's a very sophisticated system. Structural racism is a labyrinth. It's a labyrinth structure that locks in control mechanisms. It locks in white power. It locks them in to these control mechanisms in societal places and society and the pedagogies of society. It locks it in and it creates obstacles, it creates boundaries, it creates glass ceilings to maintain that power structure. So when I say a labyrinth, black folk feel like if we figure out the rules, it's like when I listen to people talk about money. If we figure out how to operate group economics, right? A popular term that we utilize because it's been sort of coined by our elder, Dr. Claude Anderson. If we understand group economics, we can defeat white supremacy by simply enhancing, creating an economy within our community that, the money cycles, 6 to 10 times before it goes back out of the community. Well, no, that's one part of it. But the labyrinth is, and what a labyrinth is a maze that changes over and over so you can never get out of the labyrinth. The exits change, the walls change, the pathways change. This is what you see when you're dealing with so-called structural racism. And I really, I can appreciate the young lady's definition, but it's one of those things where black people, educated black people, want to sanitize the message so that it's appetizing or at least appealing to white ears, those intellectual ears. So when we talk about racism, white supremacy, because that's what it really is. It's not structural racism. You're talking about racism, white supremacy. You're talking about creating a system where the rulers of the system will maintain eminent domain. And this is what we deal with in white supremacy. We don't, so you have to go back to the example of somebody creating the perfect economic model. Well, as our elder Neely Fuller said, if you don't understand white supremacy, racism, white supremacy, what it is, what it does, and how it operates, anything else you'll learn will only serve to confuse you. We've seen time and time again black people try to reconstruct, resurrect Wall Street, Black Wall Street, and it has never succeeded. First and foremost, it hasn't succeeded because you're still trying to operate it within the system of white supremacy. You don't have the resources. The resources will be pulled away from you. You can't go to a bank and get the nesting fund that you would need to create said structure. You have to go through different laws, policies, elections, and politicians in order to move 1 foot forward. You can't start a school in your community without the backing of your state legislature. Not a so-called legal school. We can do the homeschooling, but that wasn't until recently when President Bush created the program. Former President Bush created the program in which schools can start, utilizing stipends in order to fund individualized choices in school. So, but if say that hadn't happened, we wouldn't have black homeschools right now taking place. And they still have to go through a legislative board to be certified. Your high school diploma has to be certified. So and that's just one example. There's other examples. We talk about not just the education, but you don't control who's policing your community. You don't control how your communities are being policed. There have been plenty black booming towns, and we can go back throughout history and see how those towns were burnt down. There were mass extermination campaigns taking place in those towns. Some of those towns are underwater right now because dams were released from upstream. And That was all done with very little legal prosecution of any of the white folk who committed those crimes. In fact, many of them have been covered up. You don't even know their name.
Right.
Those are the protections of white supremacy, and this is what happens when you're dealing with so-called institutional racism. The institutions themselves are they feed the engine of white supremacy, which is then fed by those people who benefit from the system of white supremacy. And when those rules and things don't work, they change the rules. That's the labyrinth of it all. We'll figure out the structure. We're better at it than they are. Then they'll change the rules. Therefore, no matter what we do within their system, we'll never amass the power to take over their system or to get free from their system, because there are people who have tried to set up off grid. That's been made illegal in damn near all 48 continental states. So I'll digress.
And Pat, you can jump in on this too, but I'm just because I'm throwing this out to both of you, and whichever one of you want to catch it first is cool. But because it seems to me she was using the term structural racism and institutional racism interchangeably. And in my opinion, or from how I'm seeing it, from what I've learned, seems like institutional racism is a component of structural racism. Like, what do you guys think about that? Like, is structural racism and institutional racism the same thing, or do you disagree or agree with me that institutional racism is a component of structural racism?
I'm gonna let the Blazer. I'm following the Blazer tonight. I ain't got my blazer on, man.
You got your cape on, don't you?
You don't need a blazer. Superheroes don't need blazers. So they're byproducts and feed off each other. So if you have institutional racism, the institutions that you create protect the superior class of people. I mean, when I say superior class, I mean the dominant class of people. So I'm not saying white folk are better than us, y'all. Just please, because oh my God, I hate having those conversations.
They're winning. They're winning.
They are. Shit. If you look at the scoreboard, but if you so when you talk about institutional racism, you're talking about the institution. So she mentioned school. Schools are an institution. We can even talk about politics. The political structures. Those are institutions. You want to talk about the eccentric sector. Those are institutions. All these different places are institutions that are reinforced by these institutions. Now, the structural racism is more so maintaining the integrity of said racist institutions. So if you structurally put a system together to maintain itself as the power base, as the power source, the control mechanism, but it all still falls under the umbrella of racism, white supremacy.
Right.
And I think that's the and that's the main cause. See, when you start talking about breaking it down, this, that, and the other, that's when you get into these places where you sort of muddy the waters in terms of understanding the power structure or understanding, the totality of it all. It's all racism, white supremacy, and
right.
And when I think we try to break it down into bite-sized chunks, but it still diminishes, the effects of us dealing of the effects it has on us. It minimizes it, and it also creates windows and pockets where people can dissipate from blame, and people can pretend as though if we only want to talk about this, hey, well, that's not us. It's kind of like with the whole concept of critical race theory. There's no such thing as race theory when it comes to this. We don't have to examine, the theory of it all. It's no damn theory. This is in practice.
Right. What you think, Pat?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I feel like when it comes to the intellectual elite, the academics, they like to try to sound smart instead of just saying what need to be said. And I have no doubt that the young lady is smart. By no means am I calling the lady stupid. But I am saying that the uh the educational institutions and systems teaches us to speak in a way that is filled with vagaries and safe places to hide. You know what I'm saying? Like we become very skilled at word games. And we become unconsciously skilled at them to where now we don't even realize that we're playing the word game because the word game has been drilled into us. You know, that's what all of the papers and everything else is drilling this game into you. To me, I simplify everything. Like I follow the KISS method to death. You know, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Structural racism deals with structures. Systemic racism deals with systems. Institutional racism deals with institutions. We can go deeper, but then the question becomes, do we really need to?
What?
Like, is there any added benefit? Sure, on a high level, right? Like, if the three of us are sitting down and we know that we all understand these terms and we're
We can
making
go
an
there.
in-depth plan to do something. But just in terms of like speaking to the masses, there's no benefit. Going any deeper than that literally breaks the argument. It breaks the discussion.
Well, that's why I was asking, because like I said, she used both terms to describe structural racism, and she also did describe institutional racism, but it was, you can hear her at one point using them interchangeably. But I was like, the institution doesn't exist without the structure. So the institution and the structure is not the same thing. The structure is the foundation, it's the body, it's the frame that holds it up, and everything else keeps it going.
Look, according to Oxford, structure is the arrangement of and relations between the parts or elements of something complex.
It's the code.
So put racism behind that. There you go.
It's the code.
Institution, an established law, practice, or custom. Put racist behind that. There you go. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just keep it simple. Like,
it's the code.
But yeah, she was using them interchangeably. I don't agree with using them interchangeably.
That's why I asked.
I believe that we need to be specific and intentional. And in most cases, there's no need to even get down into the depths of structural, systemic, or institutional. I agree with PC. Racism, white supremacy, the white supremacist variation of racism is what we're dealing with. That's about as specific as we need to get. We're dealing with racism. What kind? The white supremacist kind.
White racism.
That's it. Like, we good. All right, can we move on now?
But that's why, like, when I was watching it, after I watched it, I was like, I prefer and I appreciate Neely Fuller's breakdown of what racism overall is, because it covers all this. Because, you know, white supremacy negatively affects all 9 areas of human activity for non-white people. So racism fuck up everything you do. Everything you do, it negatively affects everything. Now, what you gonna do about it?
Well,
and the one thing, well, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mr. Blazer. You on it today because you was cooking for the first little bit, man. I ain't gonna hold you. Go ahead.
I bet you got on cologne too.
So fresh.
My bad.
Oh, no, that's all good.
Yo, brother, silly, man.
One of the things that I neglected to bring in is the power dynamic, because you need the power dynamic to make this happen. You need the power dynamic to force this, and you need the power dynamic to be able to oppose your will on other people, which basically is the synthesis of white supremacy. If you want to talk about it, it's the ability to impose your will on other groups of people through all those areas of human activity, and some that's not even mentioned. By Elder Neely Fuller, the institution of health, the institution of well, I mean, and listen, I ain't gonna take nothing away from Elder Neely Fuller because he covered it all in the compensatory code book. But I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that power dynamic because that's very important. Because a lot of times you'll have Negroes and white folk talking about, well, black people can be racist too, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, we don't have the power dynamic in our favor to be. We can show bigotry, we can be prejudiced, we can discriminate against you,
Right.
but we don't have the ability to implement an entire institution that will structurally objectify white folk. We just don't have it. I mean, even when you look at things that were created to empower black people, policies such as hate crimes. If you go look at the legislation or you go look at the numbers, more black people get hit up with hate crimes than anybody else. How the hell? How the hell does that work? So, when you think about the power dynamic,
We can tell you how it worked. We can tell you how it worked. Look, when you don't, so like you, I'm glad you're going down this road because I wrote down power and control. Right, I can tell you exactly how that works. I have the power to make it work, but also I can turn your fight against you and use it for my gain. So you push against these things, and then when you do it, we hit you hard with it. Right. And so also let's break it down. Let's look at it. How does white supremacy dominate economics? How does white supremacy dominate education? How does white supremacy dominate entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, war, and counter war? How does white supremacy dominate all of those areas? And I believe health would probably fall under the politics because the way he described politics is human interactions. But
yeah,
how does white supremacy dominate all of those areas?
Well,
That's
I
the
think
structure.
I wanted to say, one, yes, Dr. Neely Fuller did cover a lot, but he didn't cover everything. And
Right.
I'm
It
pushing
went on
back
him
on
too.
that. Only reason I'm pushing back on that is because it's a lot of and we can't get nowhere. I was just saying we can't make progress if we can't be critical. PC, you made a very valid point, and then you kind of stutter stepped a little bit because you thought about it.
What? Why would you expect him to cover every single aspect? Who expects that?
Right, and that's the point, though. There is room in there for people to add.
He's even adding critical.
Right. So because there was nothing wrong with what you did, PC, but I saw your brain tweaking. You was like, hold on, they're gonna not those are the you know what you do when it go up, you either pull your or you leave the room. So, but this is what I'm saying. Again, that point you made though about black people, like that's another one of those word games that I find people like to play, right? Like, because can black people be racist? The noun, think that their race is superior than another race. Sure, but can we practice racism, the verb that requires power and control? No, we can't. So why do people like to confuse terms and play games and do all of these other things? Like when you look at a black person and you say, well, black people are racist, look at them. Yeah, but we talking about racism. Why are you bringing up their personal beliefs when we talking about systems and structures and institutions that impact people's lives on a real and tangible way? And you're going to try to say that I'm
Okay.
racist because or I'm the equivalent to those people with power and control because I said
Hey,
that. Like we're not even talking about the same thing.
well, Patrick,
What?
they would say racism doesn't exist and prove that structural racism exists. How do you prove structural racism exists?
Easy. We go to the stats.
Go to the
Break it down.
outcomes.
Break it down.
Yeah,
All
go to
right,
the
break it.
stats. Go to the outcomes.
Explain it to us.
All right. Quite simple. We can use the incarceration numbers, right?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Uh, it's very interesting that a people that compose 12% of the population compose what, over 30-40% of the incarcerated individuals.
Well, black people are violent though.
Okay, well, what causes somebody to be violent?
Mm. They're just bad people.
Okay, show me how you come to that conclusion.
Well, uh, look at how they are in their music videos. Look at you in your hoods and with your gold teeth and all the things
Okay,
that
so
you be doing.
now we've entered into another dynamic. Look at us in our music videos. Okay, who funds the music videos? Who's
Uh,
the predominant purchaser of the music?
I think you rappers. You rappers. Look, Rick Ross funds his own. I know P Diddy does. I know P Diddy does. You can't tell me
Okay,
P Diddy don't.
what's the record label that all of them signed, or that most of them were signed under when they got started, and what black person owns that label?
See, now you're trying to be smart. Now you're trying to be smart because
Well,
Columbia.
we go to, but this is the thing I say. When white people start playing games like that, I disengage anyways because I understand this about racism. There's nothing that black people can do
No,
about it.
no, but no. Yes, but well, we chose to not do nothing about it. I
Well,
say that.
I'm saying it from this perspective. There's nothing black people can do to stop white people from being racist.
Right. Yes, that's true. Now, what I like about what you just did doing our exchange there is you got to the root of the problem instead of dancing around and trying to play fiddle and play semantics with him. You went straight to, well, what funds this? Right. Using the music as an example, because the white record labels and the white executives fund the destructive black music and they sign the artist. So they are the catalyst for this music to be put out. Yes, we make it, but guess what? Guess what? If the record labels tomorrow decided that this ratchet gangster music that black people make is no longer and they want jazz music to come back to the forefront, it'll get real jazzy real quick.
Oh yeah.
That's
Well,
control. That's power and control.
well, one of the things and I wrote some of the stuff down, man. Like the tools of white supremacy. One of the greatest ones is propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And they utilize propaganda in the text. They utilize propaganda in the media. It's the first thing that affects our children. So when you go to the Dow test that was given back in the 70s and then reiterated like every decade since, when black children are looking at the color spectrum of children of dolls, when they say what's the good doll, they'll point to the white one. When they say what's the bad doll, they'll point to the black doll. And this is from children that you say, wow, you guys are not even preschool yet. So what are the dynamics that are dealing with that are causing that? Bill Cosby, who was a radical in the Black Power movement in the 70s, he would actually go in the classroom and ask the children, the diverse classroom, ask the children to draw pictures of their family. And the white children's pictures would be colorful. They would be full detail. You can actually make out all the figures quite nicely, from their mother, father to little brothers and sisters. They would have blades of grass on the lawn. They would have leaves of trees. The sun would be smiling with rays coming from it. And then you'd ask the black child to draw the same picture. And basically, you would get 4 lines in a triangle making a house. You would get stick figures as the parents, brothers and siblings. Everybody would have frowns on their faces. The tree would be a lollipop and a stick going to the ground. it lacked the detail because it spoke to the depravity, the oppression, and how the oppressive nature of white supremacy, what the effect that has on small children. And you can only imagine that's the foundational part of the propaganda and education. You look at the allocation of resources. We talked about crime in the black community. Well, that's because over 40% of the black community is in poverty. So when you go just across poverty lines, it doesn't matter what race you are in America or any Western nation. The numbers are pretty much flatline. This is the standard in all those particular communities. So you remove that poverty level, and all the other groups seem to thrive, including black groups, seem to thrive in those different places. Black community, systemically, there's been a war on black men since this country's foundation. Even if you go back to antebellum slavery,
Right.
there was a war on black men. You remove men from the family structure, and you automatically cripple the family, the nuclear family, or the family structure itself. And therefore, when you remove the men, you abdicate the violence. You change the balance up, and it becomes an unstable condition to raise children. And not only raise children, but to have families that thrive. And so we know this war has been going on with black men. You have the post-war, post-Civil War. You had the introduction of the prison industrial complex. I mean, Sam Cooke speaks about this in one of his songs. I can hear the sounds of the man working on the chain, yang, yang. You know, that speaks to the fact that the chain gangs were started building railroads in this country based on black labor. We talked about before with the different laws, the black codes that were put in place that would make that in the vagrancy laws and policies of Jim Crow that arrested black men for not having jobs, arrested black men for being homeless, even though black men weren't allowed to work during those particular times. In fact, black women were the only ones allowed to work that particular time because the white families needed maids and nannies, and they needed someone to clean up their houses and look after their children. So when we look at the stabilization of the black community in terms of in terms of the effects of racism, white supremacy, all those things are structurally put in place to make sure that black people didn't have entry into any of the institutions that were coming about. And then you can put laws in place after a people's been broken or after people's been it's like this. Let's say you go into debt. I go into debt. You, Joe, you and Patrick, y'all finances are never in trouble, never in jeopardy. We work at the same job. We all three start making $50,000, $60,000 a year. Now all of a sudden, we went from $40,000 to $60,000 a year. You and Pat are doing wonderful things. You got extra money, you can invest it, you can go out, this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, me, I have to pay back all the debt that I owed while still trying to stay afloat from the incurring debt of just trying to make a living. And so you never quite catch up because your debt always accrues interest. That's black people's experience in America. And so you talk about the total effects of racism, white supremacy. That's what it's been in a nutshell. So after black people have been set so far back, you say, okay, black man, black woman, I'm going to give you the opportunity to take 2 steps forward. But they're running circles around the track. We've only been able to walk. I'm not going to talk about what we've been allowed to do. We've only been able to take a few steps forward. They still increase the distance because the systems and structures and obstacles they put in front of us make it hard for us to even keep up with them.
Well, that's why I think it's not good to try to explain structural racism or racism, white supremacy, period. To try to explain that, but don't really go into detail and don't really have full context and everything that covers it, because, and also to not be able to use institutional racism to explain or define what racism, white supremacy is, because institutional racism will be a byproduct. Because when she was talking about institutions and things, my first thought was, well, what did structural racism look like before those institutions were built? Because in order for these institutions to be built and be able to operate the way they operate, and help to educate future white supremacists, there has to already be a structure in place. And plus, remember, the institutional racism will come from that is Black people not being allowed into these institutions. That would be a part of, that's not the whole, but that would be a part of it. Black people not being allowed in these institutions, but also when Black people create when the HBCUs were created, and HBCUs are purposely underfunded. When HBCUs purposely don't have resources, we get that. But before these things happen, before these institutions were built, before these colleges were built, white supremacy racism existed in America. And white supremacy racism basically created a power structure of a master and a slave. And it was designed to maintain that master-slave relationship, that the laborer and the person who benefits from the free labor that they get from the laborer. Go ahead, PC.
Well, I mean, and I'm glad you brought up the HBCU angle, because I find it very interesting that most people who go to HBCUs don't do the research on how HBCUs came into existence and their initial purpose.
Right.
Why they came into existence. They came into existence for two purposes, for two reasons specifically. One, the first reason is because a lot of the bastard offspring of these white supremacists who were raping Black women, they needed somewhere for their children to go of higher education. They couldn't get their children to Yale or Harvard or any of these prestigious white universities. But the second one, and probably the most important one, was the fact that at the turn of the century, Rockefeller had going on this train ride, right? And it's very hard to find this information, but you got to dig deep. J.D. Rockefeller went on a train ride down the I-95 corridor. And he stated, during his train ride, that there's one of the things they talked about, and he wasn't the only one, by the way. They talked about the fact that the need to solve the Negro problem. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the things that the Negro problem that he tried to create discuss was, we released Black people from slavery, and we didn't give them any education, and we didn't give them any economics to thrive or to build on. So we basically released them, and they would become a burden if we did not do something. It was considered the white man's burden.
It was
what came from that was, the benevolent white benefactor, or the benevolent white, I forget the name of it. Anyway, the benevolent white man, let's call him that. And they determined that they were going to build these HBCUs. That was part of it. One of the biggest issues that they had was that Black people, like Booker T. Washington, was creating townships of Black entrepreneurs and teaching Blacks agricultural economics. And Black people were starting to build these townships, the Black Wall Streets that people like to talk about. And there were dozens of these so-called Black Wall Streets blowing up throughout the South and the Midwest, and becoming an economic competitor to white wealth. They needed a way to reform and reshape
and control
the mind and control Black people. So they developed this concept utilizing W.E.B. Du Bois is one of the stooges. I mean, he was a great man, but let's call it what it was. He was one of the stooges that put forth this idea. He peddled the idea of creating a talented tenth, right? But when you have the talented tenth, they were going into these institutions and learning through a European style of education with the same mindset that Dr. Carter G. Woodson warned us of when he wrote the When you want the miseducation of the Negro, right? And so they were coming back to the black communities, but they weren't necessarily coming back to the black communities to build in the black communities. They were coming back to the black communities, brainwashed enough to think that they themselves can elevate themselves to a level of whiteness as long as they academically took this information that they got from these institutions and utilized these college degrees to build their own societies. And that's when you started having these separatist movement of black people in America based on the overthrow. The role the HBCUs played in that is the HBCUs were constructed to create black folk who wanted to be white folk. And that's why up until 20 years ago, you still had grooming classes in HBCUs where they told black people how they would have to operate in the workforce, how they would have to change their grammar, how they would have to talk a specific way. You could, at Howard University, if you were in their business school, you had to cut your locks. So you had to cut your hair. You had to have a conservative haircut if you were a man. They recently was doing similar things with the women. So, you know, I bring that up to say, as we have to understand that too was that was a tool in of white supremacy utilized to further create separation and destabilization of black people.
Yeah, the Negro problem was a guise to take full control because you had skilled laborers coming out of slavery that could take over, and the Negro problem was a guise to be able to have power and control over the industries and the minds and the people that would be a part of these companies and these businesses and stuff that they would start. They had to gain control because you don't want that type of competition. Why we want that type of competition? And we have the resources and the power to quell that. So hey, here we are. That's called racism, white supremacy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think, and then too, it's important to note here that two things are often true at the same time, right? What PC said is factual. Factual from my understanding. Where I think we start running into problems is that people struggle with we taking it all the way back, the concept of white progress versus black progress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
When we all understand that when W.B. Du Bois put forth the Talented 10, his vision for it was different from what actually came about. So in this one idea of the Talented 10th, you had a black progressive purpose and a white progressive purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where white supremacy, the power dynamic, comes into play. The group that holds the power oftentimes will determine distinction, purpose, or utility when it comes to competing progressions.
Yep.
White people had the power to take this idea put forth by a black man for black progress and turn it into something of benefit to them. And so in that, we get into this other conversation about even the word choice that we use. And this is why I say we can't, because we use the analogy of running on the track. I love that analogy because I run track, I coach track. It works very well, the track analogy. I'm like, we need to get off the fucking track. Stop trying to catch up. Stop trying to get the obstacles out the way and understand. Every step you take on this track is a losing step.
JRS.
Not only do you have obstacles in your way, but if you look at their lane, they're running on high speed 2023 technical, high grade, high technology surface with the most advanced footwear you could find. And we got on some old goatskin bullshit running in beach sand. The tracks, the technology available to us is not the same. So that's why I said we got to get off the track altogether. But it's three words I love using, right, when I'm talking about this. Implant, inculcate, instill. right? When we're talking about implanting something, we're talking about permanence, a teaching that is impermanent, something that is intended to be permanent. When we're talking about inculcating, we're talking about something that is being crammed into somebody's head, right? A teaching that is over and over, is repeated with the intent of being permanent. And then when we're talking about instilling, we're talking about a gradual, gentle method of imparting something, right? These three words have three different connotations. Two of them tend to be permanent. One has the goal of being permanent, but is usually not permanent. We keep trying to counter the things that have been implanted in us and the things that have been instilled in us by trying to inculcate something different very fast. And it doesn't work. We've got to, at our earliest stages, begin to implant and instill different messages into our children. And because if we keep playing this game to where we're playing it with like the goal, like we say, what's the goal now? The goal is to get rid of racism. Well, that's a stupid goal. Why is that the goal? That's never gonna like that. Look, group psychology 101, right? Groups group up. Like teams with like. That's
become
the way
the stronger group.
Right. You're not going to get rid of racism. So, okay, well, what's next? Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
White supremacy's biggest competition are the Asians. It's the rise of the Asians. The Asians, I spoke about this in the video on Monday. The rise of the Asians, the Asian community have gotten their stuff together. The Asian continent have gotten their stuff together. And that's the competing force right now with white supremacy. It hasn't taken over, but it's the new competing force. And the minute white supremacy doesn't have the power that it still has today, Asian supremacy is there to take over. So we are the people. We're on the sideline. Matter of fact, we're not on the sideline. We're in the stands watching the game.
We're not even in the stands, Joe. We in the parking lot looking at the stadium.
Oh, okay. So we like the kids who be in the trees.
Because if you being real, if you're being real about it, right now, white people are running the field, right? But they, globally speaking, they're competing against the Asians, right?
Right.
In the stands, it are the Hispanics who have some kind of way decided they were going to form their own group, and they have managed to split away from Europeans for the time being.
Yeah, they getting ready to play.
The Hispanics are in the stands. The Indians, who I know geographically would be considered Asians, but culturally and ethically consider themselves something different. The Indians are also in the stands. Like, yeah, we got our turn.
The Indians own the stands.
Right. Black people are in the parking lot talking about, hey, bro, remember when it was our turn? Man, I remember, bro. We was lit. Remember that shit? Right. That's what we doing in the parking lot.
Tailgate.
Yeah, we've been warned.
I couldn't think of the word.
That's all right.
Say it again. Tailgate. Yeah, tailgate. Okay, yeah. No, we're not. No, we're not. No, we're not tailgating. You know how you see, you watch those baseball games in those Hispanic countries in the Caribbean when the kids be in the trees watching the game for free because they don't have the money to get in. That's us. We climb the trees to watch the game for free. In the park.
Right. And we hope that even though all of those other groups don't fuck with us, they don't like us, we just hope one of them beat white people.
Right.
Because we don't understand that even if they do beat white people, ain't shit gonna change for you.
They have a structure too. We'll just be talking about a different structure.
Actually, it might get worse because white people have still some agency for us, some use for us. May not be as much as it used to be, but there is still, in order to maintain the dominance of white supremacy, you need a submissive class.
Right.
And that permanently submissive class is black people. Black
Right.
people have chosen
True.
submission, beaten into submission. So in order to continue the aura, the legend of white supremacy, you still need that class. Asians don't need that shit.
No.
The Indians don't need
They
that.
don't need us.
The
They don't
Indians
need
don't even
us.
practice in their own country.
They don't
Um,
need us at all. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
and
Asians
but
don't either for that matter.
but that's a great point because the power base that the Asians built was not based off of black labor. The power base that white supremacy was built off of black labor. So the Asians don't need us at all. It's free. They're free of us.
but even still,
Nobody needs us, like he was just saying. Nobody
yeah,
needs us. But the Europeans have some utility for us. The other groups don't even have a historical reference
Right.
for anything. It's just like we don't like they don't. I mean, hell, the Asians. It's like, look, the only we don't. Even if you want to say this theory that white people need black people for genetic blah blah blah, Asians is like, well, we don't even need
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Right.
yeah, it's interesting, right? And the word I was looking for earlier was philanthropy. But and you were right, Pat, because W.E.B. Du Bois did speak to the Boule, a message to the Boule, and he, basically before he went to move to Africa, he basically told them about his disgust and how they mutated his ideas of town to town. So I do want to give him credit there. But going back to that point, it was long understood, and George Wallace used to say this, the racist Alabama governor of the Jim Crow era. He used to say, if poor whites and black people got together, they could rule the world. But poor whites were always thought that no matter how poor I am, at least I'm not a nigger. And that maintains to this day. This is why you have white folk in Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi voting against their interests. They're red states. They vote against their interests. These are in Louisiana, the four poor states in the country, and they all vote against their best interests. I want to include Alabama in that too. And they all vote against.
Florida too.
But Florida got bread. But yeah, I give it just
Florida man. Yeah. Just Google Florida man.
State do, not the people.
Right. Miami is holding everybody together right now. In Orlando. But that part is important to understand in terms of just the mindset, because is the same way we talk about the superiority complex that white folk have. We have an inferiority complex of black folk that black people are uncomfortable with acknowledging, and also they figured out a way to maintain this and still have black people comfortable enough that they don't want to really rock the boat.
That's the refinement.
Yeah. Like I've seen it. I've seen black folk get riled up. We should do something. Then you start talking about what you should do, and they start realizing, wait a minute,
right?
I'm gonna lose access to my cable TV. Hold on for a minute.
But also,
give up my iPhone.
Also, if let's say I'm a black person who grew up in the hood, and I had all the adversity against me, but I was an athlete, or I was smart, and I got a chance to be in the IB program, like here, the International Baccalaureate program. So that's the academic advancement. So those are mostly white spaces. So you're this person from this disadvantaged place who allowed in these white spaces, either because of your academic prowess or your athletic prowess. So you move through these channels with these white people and a handful of black people, all these white people, and you're able to find personal success in the world, personal success in America, and in these arenas where these white people predominate, what these white people dominate. Though I see a lot of people who take those tracks and their mindset is, well, racism, white supremacy, it cannot exist. Look at me. And you'll never be able to understand. Well, that's the confusion Nigel Fuller was talking about, because you're looking at it from your individual standpoint. And if you know 10 other black people or even 50 other black people who came up that way and had those opportunities, you would say, well, look at me and these 49 other black people. How could you say structural racism exists when all of us were able to be successful in these predominantly white areas coming from these disadvantaged backgrounds? And see, those are the people who are short-sighted because they think that racism is predicated on their experience and it's greater than you. What happened to black people outside of those 50 people that you know?
Well, Jackie Robinson, let me tell you what happened. You you were putting you were actually cherry picked to be in this spot in this space. And let's not look at it from a
Talented
perspective.
10th.
Well, not just talented Tim, because I don't think these Negroes don't know. I just think they have a fuck the rest of them niggas attitude. I'm looking out for me and mine, and the rugged individualism that's been instilled in black people since the plantation. So, I just think, and we really don't give credit to how good the slave making plantations, like on Barbados, when they were trying to refine slavery, the methods of Willie Lynch and the different things that took place in terms of learning how to separate black folk, the separation of the multitude of tribesmen that came to America, and you had people who were actually in chains with warring tribes that got here. There was no homogeneous culture for black people in this country at any time, any given time. And the only time there was a homogeneous culture, there was two times, is when black people started to create their own cultures on plantations, utilizing the drum, formalizing a common language and so forth. And then there was the church. And the church was more dominant because after the Haitian Revolution, drumming was outlawed on plantations here in America. And once you started to see the evolution of the black church, well, who controlled the black church? Who controlled the theology in the black church?
Ultimately, right. But, and my bad, just say this real quick, but great point, because Pat made the point earlier and you're making it now. Because when we're talking about being able to explain and prove structural racism, you have to get at who controls these institutions, who controls the structure, who controls the culture, who controls all these things. That's where you'll find it, and you'll see the outcomes coming from the people who control it. So we're talking about all the disparities that black people have. If you follow the breadcrumbs, it'll take you back to the person, to the puppet master who's in control the whole time. I bet not to cut you off, but just that.
No. Because that's a great point. And you're right. I'm really, rhetorically speaking, supporting Pat's point from earlier. And then I'm gonna go back to Pat's point about getting off the track, because that's the point of the labyrinth. The exit of the stands was one place. We circled the track one time, said, okay, next time we getting off on this place. We got to that exit, the maze changed. And now that exit is no longer there. And then they put a carrot in front of you and say, well, damn it, well, I can at least get the carrot and find some sustainability. I'm going to get to that. And it's to the point where you just start chasing the carrot. It's programming. And the reason why, the Tavistock Institute of Britain, or in was it Britain or Germany? It was one of those two places. Germany, I think. Tavistock Institute. Then you had the Rockefeller School of Psychology, right? And then you had the Federal Board of Education. All these things were designed for the deliberate dumbing down of people. Psychology was not about understanding the human mind. It was about understanding how to control the human mind, using the term that Pat spoke to earlier about groupthink. You get black people, and specifically, like I said, we don't have a defining black culture of proliferation. We do have a black culture, but this black culture we have is a death culture. It's one in
London.
Huh? Yeah, London.
Okay, is in London. Yeah.
Thank you. So one of we have this death culture that doesn't produce anything. It's like soil that doesn't produce any fruit. It doesn't produce any yield. And we keep talking about planting seeds, but we ain't got the right soil to germinate the seeds because the culture is the soil. And we're not even trying to burn the brush to create the genetic material that will be necessary for that. Because like Pat said, we want a fast solution, quick, fast, and over. We want to jump into it. You know why we want to jump into it? Because we really ain't about that fight. We want this shit to be over with so we can get back to the game. The game is on Sunday. The day is this day. Today is Friday. I need this shit to be over Friday night.
Easy.
Fucking Colorado's playing tomorrow. I want to see what Prime doing. I ain't got time for this shit. Women like, yo, free before 11. I'm trying to get my twerk on. Yo, let's get this shit over with.
But you better fight structural racism as a power unit, as a group of empowered people with resources, power, money, and land. That's how you best fight white supremacy.
No, Joe. We're gonna all stop shopping on Friday. We're gonna all save our money on Friday. So this shit is over on Saturday.
My bad.
And then Saturday they're gonna come to us begging with their hands out.
You're right. And we got to change our social media profile to black squares. I forgot about that shit.
Right. I put that on there and turn your cell phones off for 2 hours because they're gonna try to submit this chip through FEMA and y'all better put some tinfoil in your shit. You know, we all into all types of silly shit. And we want the quick, fast solution to solving an institution that was put together to build the Western world. When Columbus set voyage, Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand
it was already in place.
But see, it was in place when they exiled the Moors out of Spain in 1472. All right, but then they commissioned Leonardo da Vinci to build, to write, to create and draft the Last Supper, the portrait of the Last Supper, so they could bring Jesus, white Jesus, into the Western world. And they knew when they got here that it was to build an empire that was going to take the test of time. And that's what we're dealing with right now. That was some of the origins, the seeds that were planted in this soil. And it's things that we have not gone back to fully understand. And because we're dealing with over 700 years of planning, of building, institutionalizing fucking ancient war that's been placed upon. We don't even want to acknowledge it's a war. We don't even respond like it's a war. And that's why we are where we are.
Yeah.
We want this shit over tomorrow.
No, that was powerful. And I think I like what was said, and it's been rattling around in my brain. When PC talked about the representation, when you guys were both talking about that whole we always need, we need somebody we can look at, like this one person is an example. I just wanted to harp on that real quick. Not harp on it, but just kind of restate that, because that's that representational piece that we hear a lot of black celebrities talking about. And I want everybody to really just think about it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we heard this with Barack Obama. We've heard it with Shaq. We've heard it with every major celebrity or figure, how they're a representation. Kids need to see this representation of blacks, and just think about what that really means. Like, what are they really saying?
The context of it.
Right. Like, because I think it also feeds into what PC was saying about the carrot and everything else he just said. Like, and that's always been something that's kind of bothered me a little bit, is how heavily dependent, because of how ruggedly individualistic we are and how easy it is to sell us a bill of goods, how little thought we put into what is happening when you point to the one that made it and ignore the millions that didn't. So, but I almost didn't want to make that point, but I felt like it was necessary, because
that's a good point.
PC just that was powerful. What you just said
But
there, good sir.
but like you're getting at, representation matters. Yes, but what's the context of it? Because when black people talk about representation matters, they're talking about black representation in white spaces. And when you have it matters, they're saying it matters to us, it matters to black people, it matters to young black people to see black people in white spaces and successful in white spaces. And not getting really what they're getting at is we are seeing black people help to maintain and basically help to maintain white spaces, what white institutions, what white people built for themselves. And once again, it go back to the cherry picking. That talent, those skill sets, that energy is not being put into what we should be building for ourselves and maintaining for ourselves. No, the representation that we should be fighting and eager to see is black representation and black spaces are building and maintaining and making sure that black institutions and black systems and black enterprises are thriving. That should be the representation that we should be looking at, not individual black people in white spaces. No, black spaces thriving.
And I'm sorry, real quick. Before we all go back to idolizing the Black Wall Street, we also need to take that representation into context too, because I believe the number is something like 70% of the wealth in the famous Black Wall Street was concentrated in the hands of less than 25% of the residents. There were like 5 or 6 major families that had most of the wealth. That's not the egalitarian society that a lot of y'all are thinking about, and that is because it was structured after fill in the blank.
Right. And that's a very important point to make, Patrick. Because also it was done in a place where black folk had no place to go. You couldn't go to a white theater, so they built black theater. You couldn't go to a white supermarket, so they built black supermarket. You couldn't get in a white taxi, so black people created taxi company. But it was done out of necessity. And
Right.
then when Brown versus the Board of Education, you had black folks say, "Well, I no longer need to go to black businesses no more because Mr. Cartwright's ice is a little colder." You know, so and and I think about it, from like just even a competitive perspective, right? I was doing a lecture about, and it was one of those it was a prep lecture where I was telling black folk we need to start putting together safe houses for food stock in case a national emergency occurred, right? How was I supposed to know that Flint, Michigan would occur like 2 months later? But during that lecture, we had a session afterwards, and we were talking to the brothers and sisters that were in the audience. We were comparing businesses, and we were talking about, and I mentioned that when you look out the window, you can see the skyline, Center City, Philadelphia. I said, there's not one black building in that skyline. And then when the brothers started talking about some, yeah, but when I go into a black business and they mess up my sandwich, I got a problem with their attitude. And I had to break it down to them, like, brother, just understand the scope and scale we're talking about. When we started talking about white businesses, we were talking about sky rises of cities, buildings 40, 50, 60 stories. We talked about a black business, you talking about some motherfucker that own a sandwich shop.
But not even, in addition to that, you went from talking about sky rises to the building, but then when you talked about the black business, you talked about the service and the products. You didn't talk about the building. You didn't talk about the structure. You did, because it's not like you said, well, man, these buildings talk, they food trash. Nah, you was like, I love these buildings, but man, I hate black businesses who be acting crazy. You not get that.
Yeah. And that's the point, John. I mean, that's one of the biggest points. It's like we in order to leave the labyrinth, you know, is the system is designed to have a force shield up for us, even if we get past the labyrinth. That's going to hold us back, and we would need a force of black folk to get out of the labyrinth, to get out in that place. You know, this is like, if you think about it, this is like the Hunger Games, and we're fast approaching the Hunger Games. If people aren't paying attention, economically speaking, black communities food costs twice as much as it did a year ago, but you don't have all the resources you had a year ago. The pandemic funds are over. September 30th was the end of pandemic funds.
Mm-hmm.
Black folk who, you know, want to talk about all I can think about, I don't catch feelings, I catch flights, are going to be catching hunger pains real soon. Black women are being evicted at a rate higher than anybody else, twice, 3 times as high as any other group of women in the country. Black men are still dealing with record levels of unemployment in this country and underemployment. So you can be employed, but just not enough to earn a living. So the cost of living skyrocketed. It used to be a time where $500 a month would get you a studio apartment here in Philadelphia. Now you need up to $1,600 to $2,000 a month for a studio apartment in North Philadelphia, right? So you want to compare North Philadelphia? Think about South Side Chicago. Think about Brooklyn, New York. Think about the worst parts of Detroit. Think about the worst parts of Baltimore. That's North Philly. People are struggling out here. If you go and listen, if you this just for research purposes, go to some of these websites where women are offering their bodies for pennies to the dollar in terms of how long they're on these websites. Black women offering their bodies on these websites just so they can get something to eat. I want y'all to truly understand. I'm not saying this
It's real
from a perverse way. I'm not saying this from a way. I'm saying this from an anthropological way here. Looking into this. The outlook is not good because even though people are devious, they're still going to choose food over sex. You know? And this is where we're going. This is how now you want to talk about institutional racism? This is how it works.
Hey, this. But all in all, I saw the clip. I thought the clip was interesting for us to take a deep dive into structural racism, white supremacy, institutional racism, kind of looking at all of these components, but looking at understanding structural racism, institutional racism are components of racism, white supremacy. And you know, they all go hand in hand. And I like how you opened up, PC, talking about the labyrinth, because it's a maze, it's a puzzle to try to get out of, and you have to solve it. Like a labyrinth, you have to put your thinking cap on to get out of it. If it's a puzzle, you have to put your thinking cap on to solve it. Racism, white supremacy is a puzzle that needs to be solved. And we have people who've given us puzzle pieces, and we have a lot more puzzle pieces that still need to be created, to be put on the board. But all in all, they need to be put on the board and put together. You cannot fight a system as individuals. You cannot fight racism, white supremacy as individuals. It's a group game. The Asians are ready. The Indians, well, the Hispanics got their stuff together. The Asians got their stuff together. We the only ones that got our stuff together. That's why we in the trees watching the game for free, because we don't have the resources to get in the game. So what we gonna do? Joseph Ward, Patrick Irvin, Professor Carl Tone Jones. Of course, you know it's Friday, 7 p.m. FetLifeStation.com. If you ain't there, I don't know what's wrong with you. We'll holler. And make sure y'all catch the next video coming up.